Maria Santos had always been different from other girls in her small village of San Miguel. While her friends giggled about boys and dreamed of wedding dresses, Maria found herself more interested in books and helping her father with his carpentry business. She was known throughout the village for her beauty, with long dark hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite her young age of 22. The suitors began arriving when Maria turned 18. First came Carlos, the baker's son, who would leave fresh bread at her doorstep every morning with little notes written in his clumsy handwriting. Maria would politely thank him, but never showed any romantic interest. Her mother, Elena, would shake her head and wonder why her daughter couldn't see what a good match Carlos would be. Next was Roberto, whose father owned the largest farm in the area. He was handsome and wealthy, everything a young woman was supposed to want. Roberto would ride his horse past Maria's house several times a day, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. When he finally gathered the courage to speak to her father about marriage, Maria's response was swift and definite. She thanked Roberto for his interest, but explained she had no desire to marry anyone. The village began to whisper. Why would such a beautiful girl reject perfectly good men? Some said she was too proud. Others wondered if she had taken a secret vow of celibacy. Maria's parents, Elena and Diego, grew increasingly worried. In their culture, a woman who didn't marry by 25 was considered strange, possibly cursed. As months passed, more suitors appeared. There was Fernando, the school teacher, who impressed everyone with his education and gentle manner. He would discuss books with Maria, thinking this would win her heart since she loved reading. But even intellectual connection wasn't enough to change Maria's mind. She enjoyed their conversations but felt no spark of romance. Then came Miguel, the son of the village mayor. He was persistent, showing up at her house almost daily with gifts and flowers. His approach was more aggressive than the others, and he made it clear that he expected Maria to accept his proposal. When she refused, Miguel became angry, telling her she would regret rejecting such an important family. This only strengthened Maria's resolve to remain single. The most surprising suitor was Father Antonio's nephew, Eduardo, who had come to visit from the city. He was sophisticated and worldly, unlike the village men. Eduardo spoke of taking Maria to live in Mexico City, showing her a life beyond the small village. For a moment, Maria's parents hoped this might be the man to change their daughter's mind. But Maria's answer remained the same. By the time Maria reached 24, she had rejected over a dozen men. The village gossip grew louder and more cruel. Some women whispered that Maria must be hiding a terrible secret. Others suggested she was waiting for someone who would never come. A few even whispered about supernatural reasons for her strange behavior. Maria's mother, Elena, became desperate. She consulted with the village curandera, a wise woman named Doña Carmen, who was known for her spiritual insights. Doña Carmen listened carefully to Elena's concerns and then said something that chilled the worried mother to her bones. She told Elena that some souls are marked for unusual destinies, and that forcing such a person into a normal life could bring terrible consequences. Despite the curandera's warning, Elena continued trying to convince her daughter to choose a husband. She would invite potential suitors for dinner and arrange chance encounters around the village. But Maria remained unmoved by all efforts to pair her with any living man. The rejection of so many suitors began to affect the entire village. Dynamics. Some of the men who had been turned down left San Miguel entirely, seeking wives in other towns. Others married different women but were never quite able to forget the girl who wouldn't have them. The parents of rejected suitors sometimes treated Maria's family coolly, creating social tension that hadn't existed before. Maria herself seemed untroubled by the controversy surrounding her single status. She continued helping her father with his carpentry work, learning skills that most women of her time never acquired. She could build furniture, repair roofs, and handle tools with expertise that amazed everyone who watched her work. Some people, said this unfeminine behavior explained why she had no interest in marriage. During quiet evening hours, Maria would often walk to the old cemetery at the edge of town. She found peace among the weathered headstones and ancient trees. The place that frightened most villagers felt welcoming to her. She would sit on a stone bench and read books by moonlight, or simply enjoy the silence that was impossible to find in her busy household. It was during one of these cemetery visits that Maria first noticed something unusual. A cool breeze would sometimes touch her face even on completely still nights. She began to sense a presence nearby, though she never saw anyone. Rather than feeling frightened, Maria felt a strange comfort, as if someone was watching over her with gentle protection. The village priest, Father Antonio, became concerned about Maria's frequent cemetery visits. He spoke to her parents about the impropriety of a young woman spending time alone in such a place, especially at night. But Maria's father, Diego, defended his daughter, saying she had never caused any real trouble and should be allowed some privacy for her thoughts. As Maria approached her 25th birthday, the pressure from her family and community reached its peak. Her mother cried daily, worried that her daughter would become a lonely spinster. Her father, though more understanding, also felt concerned about Maria's future security. In their society, unmarried women had few options and little protection if their parents died. The village matchmaker, an elderly woman named Señora Gutierrez, made one final attempt to find Maria a husband. She had heard of a widower in a neighboring town who was looking for a wife to help raise his 3 children. Señora Gutierrez described him as kind and stable, a man who needed companionship more than passion. Surely, she argued, Maria could find happiness in such a practical arrangement. But Maria's response was the same as always. She thanked everyone for their concern, but insisted she was content with her life as it was. She had no desire to marry any man, whether for love, security, or social acceptance. What Maria didn't yet realize was that her destiny involved a very different kind of union, one that would shock the village and challenge everything they believed about love, marriage, and the boundary between life and death. The strange occurrences began 3 days after Maria's 25th birthday. She had been working in her father's workshop, sanding a wooden table, when all the tools suddenly organized themselves into perfect rows without anyone touching them. Maria stared in amazement, thinking perhaps she had imagined it. But when she mentioned the incident to her father, Diego looked troubled and made the sign of the cross. That same week, Maria's mother, Elena, discovered that someone had been leaving flowers on their doorstep every morning. These weren't ordinary flowers from the village gardens, but exotic blooms that didn't grow anywhere near San Miguel. The flowers were always perfectly arranged and never wilted, remaining fresh for days, longer than natural flowers should. When Elena asked around the village, no one admitted to leaving them. Maria found herself drawn more frequently to the cemetery during this time. The mysterious presence she had sensed before seemed stronger now, more real. Sometimes she could swear she heard whispered words carried on the wind, though she could never make out what was being said. The feeling wasn't frightening, but rather comforting, like being embraced by invisible arms. One evening, as Maria sat reading by candlelight in the cemetery, the flame began to flicker in a strange pattern. It would dim and brighten in what seemed like a rhythm, almost like someone was trying to communicate. Maria watched, fascinated, and began to notice that the flickering matched the beating of her own heart. When she placed her hand over her chest, the candle flame pulsed in perfect synchronization with her pulse. The village began to notice other, unusual events surrounding Maria. Señora Martinez, who lived next door, reported that she often heard beautiful singing coming from Maria's house late at night, but when she listened carefully, she realized it was a man's voice, not Maria's. When she asked Elena about it the next day, Maria's mother insisted no one had been singing and that Maria had been alone in her room. Father Antonio decided to investigate these reports personally. He had known Maria since she was a child, and had never seen any sign that she was involved with dark forces. But the stories circulating through the village were becoming too numerous to ignore. He visited the Santos family home one afternoon and spoke privately with Maria about the strange occurrences. Maria was honest with the priest about her experiences. She described the presence she felt in the cemetery, the mysterious flowers, and the candle flame that seemed to respond to her heartbeat. She also mentioned something she hadn't told anyone else. Sometimes she heard her name being called by a gentle male voice, especially when she was alone at night. Rather than feeling afraid, Maria said these experiences filled her with a sense of love and protection she had never felt before. Father Antonio was deeply troubled by Maria's account. He had heard stories of supernatural romances in other parts of Mexico, but had never encountered such a situation personally. He advised Maria to pray for guidance and to avoid the cemetery until he could research what might be happening to her. But Maria found it impossible to stay away from the place that had become so important to her. During this time, Maria began having vivid dreams that felt more real than her waking life. In these dreams, she walked through beautiful gardens with a man whose face she could never quite see clearly. He had dark hair and gentle hands, and when he spoke, his voice was the same one she heard calling her name. In the dreams, they would talk for hours about books, about life, about dreams, and hopes. Maria would wake from these dreams, feeling happier than she ever had while awake. The man in her dreams told her his name was Alejandro. He explained that he had been watching over her for many years, waiting for the right time to reveal himself. He said he had fallen in love with her pure heart and independent spirit, qualities that made her different from other women he had known. When Maria asked why she couldn't see his face clearly, Alejandro would only say that some barriers took time to overcome. Meanwhile, the village was becoming increasingly concerned about Maria's behavior. She had begun talking to herself, though she insisted she was having conversations with someone others couldn't see. Her work in the carpentry shop became even more skilled, as if invisible hands were guiding her tools. Neighbors reported seeing lights in her bedroom window late at night, moving in patterns that suggested two people were present, though Maria was known to be alone. Elena and Diego Santos were at their wits' end. Their daughter seemed happy, but was clearly experiencing something beyond normal human understanding. They consulted with Doña Carmen again, and this time the curandera's advice was even more mysterious. She told them that Maria had been chosen for a special kind of love, one that existed between worlds. She warned them not to interfere, as such interventions could be dangerous for everyone involved. The most dramatic incident occurred during the village's annual harvest festival. Maria had attended reluctantly, pressured by her parents who hoped social activity might distract her from whatever was affecting her. During the traditional dance, Maria suddenly began moving as if she had a partner, gracefully spinning and stepping in perfect rhythm with an invisible companion. The entire crowd fell silent, watching in amazement as Maria danced with someone no one else could see. After the dance, Maria's face glowed with joy. She told her parents that Alejandro had danced with her and that it was the most beautiful moment of her life. The villagers whispered among themselves, some crossing themselves in fear while others watched Maria with curiosity rather than suspicion. A few of the older women nodded knowingly, as if they had heard of such things before. Father Antonio decided he needed to take more decisive action. He arranged for a visiting priest from the cathedral in the state capital to come and assess Maria's situation. Father Miguel was known for his expertise in unusual spiritual matters and had dealt with cases of supernatural encounters before. When he arrived in San Miguel, the entire village buzzed with anticipation about what he might discover. Before meeting with Maria, Father Miguel interviewed several villagers about what they had witnessed. The stories he heard were consistent and detailed, making it difficult to dismiss them as imagination or hysteria. Senora Martinez described the mysterious singing. Elena Santos showed him the exotic flowers that continued appearing daily, and Diego Santos demonstrated how tools in his workshop would sometimes move on their own when Maria was present. When Father Miguel finally met with Maria, he was struck by her calm demeanor and obvious sincerity. She answered his questions honestly, describing her experiences without embellishment or drama. She spoke of feeling loved and protected by Alejandro and explained that her conversations with him had taught her things about life and spirituality that she had never learned from books or other people. Most significantly, Maria revealed that Alejandro had begun showing her glimpses of his true appearance in recent dreams. She could now see that he was a young man, perhaps in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore clothes that seemed old-fashioned, and sometimes she noticed details that suggested he was not from their current time period. When Father Miguel asked if she understood what this might mean, Maria nodded quietly and said she was beginning to realize that Alejandro might not be among the living. Father Miguel's investigation took an unexpected turn when he decided to research the history of San Miguel's cemetery. In the church records, he discovered something that made his hands tremble as he read. Buried in the old section of the cemetery was a young man named Alejandro Morales, who had died in 1847 at the age of 28. The date of his death was exactly 78 years before Maria's birth. According to the records, Alejandro had been the son of a wealthy landowner and was known for his kindness and intelligence. He had been engaged to marry a young woman from a neighboring town but died in a riding accident just 3 weeks before his wedding. The priest's notes mentioned that Alejandro had been buried with his mother's rosary and a letter he had written to his fiancée, expressing his hopes for their future together. When Father Miguel shared this information with Maria, she wasn't surprised. In her recent dreams, Alejandro had begun telling her about his past life. He had described his family's ranch, his love of books and music, and his tragic death that had prevented him from ever experiencing the married life he had longed for. He told Maria that his soul had remained earthbound because of his unfulfilled desire to love and protect someone completely. The revelation that Alejandro was indeed a spirit from the past caused a sensation in the village. Some people were terrified and avoided Maria entirely, crossing themselves when they saw her. Others were fascinated and began asking her questions about what it was like to communicate with the dead. A few elderly villagers shared stories they had heard from their grandparents about similar occurrences in other places. Maria's parents struggled to accept this new reality. Elena Santos spent hours praying, asking God to protect her daughter from whatever forces had taken hold of her. Diego Santos, being more practical-minded, was concerned about his daughter's future. How could Maria have a normal life if she was involved with a ghost? What would become of her when she grew old and needed care? But Maria herself felt more at peace than she ever had before. Her conversations with Alejandro had deepened, and she now understood why she had never been attracted to any living man. Her soul had been waiting for this connection that transcended physical existence. Alejandro told her that some loves were destined to cross the boundaries between life and death, and that their bond had been forming since before her birth. Third, supernatural events around Maria became even more pronounced after the truth about Alejandro's identity was revealed. Neighbors reported seeing a shadowy figure walking beside Maria when she went to market, and shopkeepers noticed that items would sometimes float gently into Maria's hands without her touching them. The mysterious flowers continued appearing, and now they were often arranged in patterns that spelled out words of love in an old-fashioned script. Father Miguel found himself in an unprecedented situation. Church doctrine was clear about the dangers of communicating with spirits, but Maria's experience seemed fundamentally different from the dark supernatural encounters he had studied. There was no evidence of evil intent, no signs of spiritual oppression or harm. Instead, Maria appeared healthier and happier than she had ever been. During one of their meetings, Father Miguel asked Maria directly about her intentions. Did she plan to spend the rest of her life in this unusual relationship? Maria's answer shocked him. She explained that Alejandro had asked her to marry him, and that she had accepted his proposal. They planned to have a ceremony that would unite their souls across the boundary between life and death. The idea of a marriage between a living woman and a ghost seemed impossible to most people, but Maria had been researching such ceremonies in her extensive reading. She had found references to spiritual marriages in various mystical traditions, and Alejandro had told her about similar unions that had occurred in his time. They believed their love was strong enough to bridge the gap between their different states of existence. News of the planned supernatural wedding spread throughout San Miguel and beyond. People came from neighboring villages to see the woman who claimed to be marrying a ghost. Some came out of curiosity, others hoping to witness a miracle or expose what they believed was an elaborate deception. The Santos family home became a destination for pilgrims, skeptics, and sensation seekers. Maria remained calm amid all the attention. She continued her daily routines, working in her father's shop and spending time in the cemetery with Alejandro. She told visitors that love was love, whether between two living people or between a living person and a soul that had chosen to remain close to earth. Her simple faith in her unusual romance impressed even those who came prepared to mock her. Father. Miguel struggled with how the church should respond to Maria's planned wedding. He consulted with his superiors and with other priests who had studied supernatural phenomena. The responses varied widely, from those who insisted such a union was impossible and potentially dangerous, to others who suggested that God's love might work in ways beyond human understanding. Meanwhile, Maria began making practical preparations for her wedding ceremony. She worked with the village seamstress to create a wedding dress, choosing simple white fabric that reminded her of the flowers Alejandro left for her each morning. She also commissioned her father to build a special wooden altar that could be placed in the cemetery where she and Alejandro felt most connected. The most touching aspect of Maria's preparations was her insistence on including Alejandro in every decision. She would discuss dress designs, flower arrangements, and ceremony details with her invisible fiancé, then report his preferences to others. Those who observed these conversations noted that Maria's responses seemed genuinely spontaneous, as if she was indeed receiving input from another person. As the date Maria had chosen for her wedding approached, the village was divided into 3 groups. Some people supported Maria and believed her love story was a beautiful miracle that proved the power of true love. Others were convinced she was delusional and needed medical or spiritual intervention. A third group remained undecided but was fascinated by the unprecedented situation unfolding in their community. The local authorities also became involved when the story reached the regional newspapers. Officials came to interview Maria and assess whether she represented a threat to public order or her own safety. After speaking with her extensively, most concluded that while her beliefs were unusual, she was clearly mentally competent and not dangerous to herself or others. Elena Santos experienced a breakthrough in her acceptance of her daughter's situation when something extraordinary happened during her own prayers. While begging God to bring Maria back to normalcy, Elena felt a warm presence surround her and heard a gentle voice assuring her that Maria was being protected and loved. Though she never saw Alejandro herself, Elena became convinced that her daughter's spiritual connection was real and blessed. Diego Santos had his own moment of recognition when he was working alone in his shop one evening. Tools began moving on their own, and he watched in amazement as an invisible craftsman helped him complete a difficult piece of furniture. The work was done with skill and precision that exceeded his own abilities, and Diego realized that Alejandro was contributing to their family's livelihood in his own supernatural way. As word of the upcoming ghost wedding spread beyond the local area, Maria received letters from people around the country sharing their own stories of supernatural encounters and unusual love stories. Some writers claimed to have similar relationships with spirits, while others shared tales passed down through their families about ancestors who had experienced comparable connections. Father Miguel made a decision that would define his own legacy in the church. After weeks of prayer and research, he announced that he would perform Maria's wedding ceremony. He had concluded that if God could work through miracles and mysteries beyond human understanding, then perhaps this unusual love story was part of a divine plan that he was not meant to question but to support. The wedding preparations took on a life of their own as the extraordinary date approached. Maria's story had spread throughout Mexico, and people began arriving in San Miguel from distant places, some traveling for days just to witness what many believed would be the most unusual wedding ceremony in history. The small village found itself overwhelmed with visitors, from curious onlookers to serious researchers of supernatural phenomena. Maria maintained her daily conversations with Alejandro, and their discussions now focused on the details of their upcoming ceremony. She explained to those who would listen that Alejandro wanted their wedding to be a celebration of love that would inspire others, not a spectacle that made light of their deep connection. Together, they planned every aspect of the event to reflect both traditional Mexican wedding customs and the unique spiritual nature of their union. The wedding dress Maria had commissioned became a work of art in itself. The village seamstress, Doña Rosa, reported that while sewing the gown, she often felt guided by invisible hands that helped her create intricate embroidery patterns she had never seen before. The dress featured delicate flowers and vines that seemed to move and shimmer in the light, and several people swore they could see two sets of initials, M and A, woven into the design in thread that appeared to be made of moonlight. Diego Santos worked tirelessly to complete the wooden altar his daughter had requested. As he carved intricate designs into the wood, he found himself creating patterns that seemed to come from some source beyond his own imagination. The altar featured intertwining hearts, roses that appeared to bloom from the wood itself, and symbols that looked ancient but somehow familiar. When it was finished, the altar seemed to glow with its own inner light. Father Miguel prepared for the ceremony by studying every theological text he could find about the nature of the soul, love, and the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. He consulted with scholars from the seminary and even reached out to indigenous spiritual leaders who had knowledge of traditions that predated Christianity in Mexico. All of his research pointed to the same conclusion. Love was indeed a force that could transcend the boundaries between life and death. The most skeptical villagers began to change their minds as they witnessed increasingly undeniable evidence of Alejandro's presence. During a rehearsal for the ceremony, attendees watched in amazement as Maria's wedding veil lifted and moved as if someone was gently adjusting it. The church bells rang spontaneously during moments of particular significance, and flowers in the cemetery began blooming out of season, creating a natural carpet of beauty around the area where the ceremony would take place. Maria's former suitors had varied reactions to news of her supernatural engagement. Some, like Carlos the baker's son, felt relieved that her rejection hadn't been personal, but rather part of a destiny none of them could have competed with. Others, particularly Miguel, who had been more aggressive in his pursuit, left the village, entirely unable to accept that Maria had chosen a ghost over living men. The most touching support came from an unexpected source. Roberto, the wealthy farmer's son, who had been one of Maria's earliest suitors, arrived at the Santos home 3 days before the wedding with a gift. He presented Maria with a beautiful mantilla that had belonged to his grandmother, explaining that he now understood why she had never been able to love any mortal man. He said he was honored to contribute something to her special day, and asked only for the blessing of witnessing true love, regardless of its unusual nature. As the wedding day dawned, the entire village of San Miguel was transformed. Hundreds of people had gathered, creating a festival atmosphere that celebrated love in all its mysterious forms. Vendors sold food and flowers, Musicians played traditional wedding songs, and children ran through the streets with ribbons and bells, turning the supernatural ceremony into a community celebration. Maria prepared for her wedding with the help of her mother and several village women who had volunteered their services. As they helped her into her magnificent dress, everyone present reported feeling the presence of other invisible helpers. Flowers arranged themselves in Maria's hair without human hands touching them, and her reflection in the mirror seemed to show a glowing figure standing beside her, though no one could see anyone there directly. The ceremony was scheduled for sunset, the time when Alejandro had told Maria that the barrier between worlds was thinnest. As the hour approached, the crowd gathered in the cemetery, filling the spaces between headstones and creating a natural amphitheater around the beautiful wooden altar Diego had created. Candles appeared to light themselves, creating a magical ambiance that made even the most hardened skeptics gasp in wonder. Father Miguel, dressed in his finest ceremonial robes, took his place at the altar as Maria made her entrance. She walked slowly down a path lined with the exotic flowers that had been appearing at her door for months, and with each step, the flowers seemed to glow more brightly. Her father escorted her with tears in his eyes, and many observers later said they could see the impression of another figure walking on Maria's other side. The ceremony itself was unlike anything anyone present had ever witnessed. Father Miguel had created special vows that acknowledged the unique nature of the union between a living woman and a departed soul. As Maria spoke her vows aloud, many in the crowd reported hearing a male voice speaking simultaneously, as if Alejandro was reciting his own promises of love and devotion. When it came time for the exchange of rings, the most dramatic moment of the entire ceremony occurred. Maria held out her hand, and a simple gold band appeared on her finger, placed there by invisible hands. The ring was warm to the touch and bore an inscription in elegant script that read, Amor eterno, eternal, love. In return, Maria placed a matching ring on what appeared to be empty air, but several witnesses swore they could see the outline of a man's hand receiving it. The kiss that sealed their marriage was perhaps the most moving moment of all. Maria tilted her face up as if kissing someone taller than herself, and for just an instant, many people in the crowd claimed to see the shadowy outline of a man holding her gently. A warm wind swept through the cemetery at that moment, carrying the scent of roses and the sound of distant music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As the ceremony concluded, Father Miguel pronounced Maria and Alejandro husband and wife in the sight of God and the community of San Miguel. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, many wiping tears from their eyes at having witnessed what they believed was a miracle of love. Church bells throughout the village began ringing spontaneously, creating a joyful symphony that could be heard for miles around. The celebration that followed was magical in every sense of the word. Tables that had been set up for the wedding feast found themselves mysteriously supplied with additional food and drink that no one could explain. Music played from sources that couldn't be identified, and couples found themselves dancing to melodies that seemed to come from the air itself. Maria glowed with happiness throughout the festivities, often turning to speak with someone no one else could see, then sharing Alejandro's comments with the guests around her. She explained that her new husband was delighted to finally meet her family and friends, even if he couldn't interact with them in conventional ways. As the evening progressed, several remarkable things occurred. Children at the celebration began playing with an invisible playmate, laughing and running as if chasing someone who was dodging and playing hide-and-seek with them. Elderly villagers found themselves remembering stories their grandparents had told them about supernatural romances, and several couples present reported feeling their own love deepened and strengthened by witnessing Maria's extraordinary wedding. The most profound moment came near midnight when Maria stood to thank everyone for sharing in her special day. As she spoke about love transcending all boundaries, including death itself, A gentle rain began to fall, but instead of sending people running for shelter, the drops felt warm and blessed everyone they touched. Many later described feeling spiritually renewed by that mysterious rain. The morning after her wedding, Maria woke as a married woman in the most unusual sense possible. She found fresh flowers beside her bed arranged in a heart shape, and her wedding ring gleamed on her finger as if it had been polished by loving hands while she slept. When she looked in the mirror, Maria could swear she saw two reflections for just a moment before the second one faded away, leaving only her own smiling face. Life as a married woman to a ghost proved to be both challenging and wonderfully fulfilling. Maria quickly discovered that Alejandro's presence was strongest during certain times of day, particularly at dawn and dusk. During these hours, their conversations were as clear as if he were sitting right beside her. She could feel his hand in hers, sense his arms around her when she needed comfort, and even smell the faint scent of the cologne he had worn in life. The practical aspects of her unusual marriage fascinated the villagers who had stayed to observe how such a relationship would function. Maria set two places at her table for every meal, and those who visited her home reported seeing food disappear from Alejandro's plate as if someone were eating it. She would discuss daily decisions with her invisible husband, from what to wear, to how to arrange the furniture, and her choices always seemed particularly inspired. Diego Santos found his carpentry business flourishing as never before. With Alejandro's spiritual assistance, the quality of their work improved dramatically. Customers came from distant towns to purchase furniture that seemed to have an otherworldly beauty and craftsmanship. Diego learned to work alongside his ghostly son-in-law, following suggestions that appeared to come from the movement of tools and the way wood seemed to shape itself under their combined efforts. Elena Santos initially struggled with having a son-in-law she couldn't see or hear directly, but gradually she began to notice Alejandro's thoughtful presence in their home. Her favorite flowers appeared in vases without explanation. Household chores sometimes completed themselves while she napped, and she began finding little notes written in elegant handwriting tucked into her recipe books, offering cooking suggestions that always resulted in delicious meals. The village of San Miguel became a destination for people seeking hope about love's power to overcome any obstacle. Couples with relationship problems made pilgrimages to meet Maria and learn from her unconventional marriage. Many left feeling renewed faith in their own partnerships after seeing how Maria's love transcended even death itself. Maria established a routine that honored both her earthly responsibilities and her spiritual marriage. She continued working in the carpentry shop during the day, but evenings were reserved for time with Alejandro. They would take long walks through the village and surrounding countryside, Maria occasionally laughing at comments only she could hear, stopping to admire sunsets that seemed particularly beautiful when shared with her other-worldly husband. The cemetery where they had married became their special retreat. Maria had a stone bench installed near Alejandro's grave, and she would spend hours there reading aloud to him or simply enjoying quiet conversation. Other couples began visiting the cemetery to seek inspiration from the love story that had begun there, and many reported feeling an unusual sense of peace and hope while near Alejandro's resting place. As months passed, Maria began experiencing what she described as spiritual intimacy with her ghost husband. While they could never be physically intimate in the conventional sense, she felt a deep soul connection that satisfied her in ways she had never imagined possible. She explained to close friends that love between souls was more profound than mere physical attraction, and that her marriage had taught her dimensions of affection that transcended bodily limitations. The couple's first anniversary approached, with great anticipation from the village. Maria planned a celebration that would honor their continuing love story and thank the community that had supported their unusual union. She worked with Alejandro to organize an event that would bring joy to everyone who had been part of their journey. Father Miguel, who had become something of a celebrity for performing the supernatural wedding ceremony, was invited to speak at universities and theological seminars about his experience. He always emphasized that Maria's story had taught him about the limitless nature of divine love and the importance of remaining open to miracles that challenged conventional understanding. During this time, Maria discovered she had developed what seemed like psychic abilities. She could sense when people were troubled and offer comfort that seemed to come from a wisdom beyond her years. Village mothers began bringing their problems to her, and Maria's advice, which she claimed came from discussions with Alejandro, proved remarkably insightful and helpful. The most surprising development was Maria's announcement that she and Alejandro were planning to expand their family through adoption. She had been moved by the plight of several orphaned children in the area and felt called to provide them with a loving home. The idea of a ghost helping to raise children seemed unusual even by the standards Maria had already established, but her obvious capacity for nurturing convinced the authorities to allow the adoptions. The first child Maria and Alejandro welcomed into their home was 7-year-old Carmen, whose parents had died in an accident. Carmen adapted to her new family situation with remarkable ease, often chatting happily with Papa Alejandro and reporting on their conversations to Maria. The little girl claimed she could sometimes see a shadowy figure tucking her in at night, and her sleep was more peaceful than it had been since her parents' death. Next came twin boys, Miguel and Diego, both 10 years old, who had been living with relatives unable to care for them properly. The boys were initially skeptical about their new family arrangement, but quickly came to appreciate the mysterious help they received with their homework and the gentle discipline that guided them away from mischief without harsh punishment. Tatis, children's presence brought new energy to the Santos household. Maria found herself fulfilled in ways she had never expected, combining her role as a supernatural wife with that of a devoted mother. Alejandro proved to be an attentive stepfather, and Maria would often relay his suggestions about child-rearing, educational approaches, and discipline that were both gentle and effective. The village watched in amazement as Maria's unusual family thrived. The children were well-behaved, excelled in their studies, and seemed genuinely happy despite their unconventional home situation. Other families began seeking Maria's advice about parenting, impressed by how well-adjusted her adopted children had become under the influence of both earthly and otherworldly guidance. As word of Maria's success, as both a ghost's wife and an adoptive mother spread, she received letters from around Mexico and beyond. Some writers shared their own supernatural experiences, while others sought advice about love, loss, and family challenges. Maria began responding to these letters, always crediting Alejandro with helping her craft thoughtful and compassionate replies. The local school teacher, Senora Rodriguez, reported that Maria's children displayed unusual creativity and wisdom in their schoolwork. Carmen wrote beautiful stories about families that included invisible members, while the twins showed remarkable skill in mathematics and craftsmanship that seemed to exceed their natural abilities. Their teacher suspected they were receiving additional instruction at home from their mysterious stepfather. Maria's marriage also brought unexpected benefits to the entire community. The village experienced unusually good fortune during this period. Crops grew more abundantly, businesses prospered, and there were fewer conflicts between neighbors. Many attributed this positive change to the blessed presence of true love that had taken root in their community through Maria's supernatural union. The anniversary celebration of Maria's wedding became an annual festival that drew visitors from across the country. People came not just to satisfy curiosity about the ghost marriage, but to participate in what had become a celebration of love in all its forms. The festival featured traditional music, dancing, storytelling about legendary romances, and blessing ceremonies for couples seeking to strengthen their own relationships. During the second anniversary celebration, something extraordinary occurred that further validated Maria's marriage in the eyes of believers. As she and the gathered crowd stood in the cemetery where she had wed Alejandro, a sudden wind arose that carried the distinct scent of orange blossoms, the traditional Mexican wedding flower. The wind seemed to dance around Maria, lifting her hair and dress in a way that made it appear as though invisible hands were caressing her. At that moment, several photographers present captured images that would become famous throughout Mexico. The pictures showed Maria surrounded by what appeared to be a glowing outline in the shape of a man embracing her. While skeptics claimed the images were tricks of light and shadow, those who knew Maria's story saw them as photographic proof of her spiritual husband's continuing presence and love. Maria's influence began extending beyond her immediate community when she started writing about her experiences. Her first book, titled Love Without Boundaries, became a bestseller throughout Latin America. In it, she described the daily realities of marriage to a spirit, the challenges and joys of 25 years after her supernatural wedding, Maria Santos Morales had become a living legend throughout Mexico and beyond. Her marriage to Alejandro had not only endured but had grown stronger with each passing year, defying all conventional understanding of relationships and mortality. Now in her 50s, Maria remained as devoted to her ghostly husband as she had been on their wedding day, and their love story continued to inspire people around the world. The children Maria and Alejandro had adopted grew into remarkable adults, each carrying forward the lessons they had learned from their unique upbringing. Carmen became a teacher who specialized in helping troubled children, often crediting her supernatural stepfather with teaching her patience and compassion. The twins, Miguel and Diego, followed their grandfather into carpentry, establishing a business that combined traditional craftsmanship with what they described as spiritual guidance in their work. All three of Maria's children married and had families of their own, but they maintained that Alejandro remained an active presence in their lives. Their own children grew up hearing stories about their ghostly grandfather, and several claimed they could sometimes sense his presence during family gatherings. The family traditions that developed around including Alejandro in celebrations became a model for other families dealing with the loss of loved ones. Maria's home had evolved into an informal pilgrimage site for people seeking hope about love transcending death. She welcomed visitors from around the world, sharing her story and offering comfort to those who had lost spouses, partners, or family members. Her living room walls were covered with letters and photographs from couples who credited her example with helping them maintain connections with deceased loved ones. The village of San Miguel had transformed dramatically since Maria's wedding day. What had once been a small, isolated community had become a destination for spiritual seekers, researchers, and tourists. The local economy flourished with hotels, restaurants, and shops catering to the thousands of annual visitors drawn by Maria's story. Yet despite the commercialization that surrounded her fame, Maria herself remained unchanged, humble, kind, and completely devoted to her supernatural marriage. Father Miguel, now a bishop, had written extensively about the theological implications of Maria's case. His scholarly work on love transcending death had influenced Catholic doctrine regarding supernatural phenomena and the nature of the soul's continued existence after physical death. He often returned to San Miguel to visit Maria and continued to marvel at the sustained miracle he had witnessed and blessed decades earlier. Scientific interest in Maria's case had never waned, and she had become the subject of the longest-running paranormal study in history. Researchers had documented thousands of incidents over the years that suggested Alejandro's continuing presence, from objects moving without physical cause to electronic devices responding to apparent invisible interaction. While definitive scientific proof remained elusive, the accumulated evidence had convinced many previously skeptical academics that consciousness could indeed survive bodily death. Maria had authored several more books about her experiences, each one revealing new dimensions of her relationship with Alejandro. Her writings explored topics ranging from spiritual communication techniques to the practical aspects of maintaining a marriage that existed between two different planes of existence. Her books had been translated into dozens of languages and had inspired a worldwide movement of people seeking connections with deceased loved ones. The most profound aspect of Maria's later years was her role as a counselor for grieving spouses and families. She had developed techniques for helping people maintain emotional connections with departed loved ones, drawing on her decades of experience communicating with Alejandro. Her methods, which combined prayer, meditation, and what she called love-focused intention, had helped thousands of people find peace and continuing relationship with those they had lost. During Maria's 60th birthday celebration, an event that had become an international spiritual festival, she made a surprising announcement. She revealed that Alejandro had told her their earthly mission was nearing completion and that she would soon join him in the spiritual realm. Rather than being mournful, Maria spoke of this transition with joy and anticipation, describing it as the next phase of their eternal love story. The announcement sparked worldwide interest and concern. Medical examinations showed Maria to be in excellent health with no signs of serious illness, yet she spoke with absolute certainty about her approaching transition. She spent the following months preparing her children and the community for her departure, organizing her affairs, and ensuring that her work helping others would continue after her death. Maria's final months were marked by increasingly frequent and vivid appearances of Alejandro that were witnessed by others. Visitors to her home reported seeing a translucent figure standing beside her, and photographs began capturing clear images of a man in period clothing who matched historical descriptions of Alejandro from church records. These manifestations seemed to indicate that the boundary between their two worlds was thinning as Maria's time for crossing over approached. 6 months after her announcement, Maria peacefully passed away in her sleep on a warm spring morning. She was found with a serene smile on her face and her wedding ring glowing as if lit from within. The exotic flowers that had appeared throughout her marriage covered her bedroom, and witnesses reported seeing 2 figures walking hand in hand away from the house as the sun rose. Maria's funeral became one of the largest gatherings in Mexican history, with people traveling from around the world to pay their respects to the woman who had proven that love could transcend even death. Father Miguel, despite his advanced age, performed the ceremony, speaking about how Maria's life had demonstrated the eternal nature of the human soul and the power of love to overcome any obstacle. The most remarkable moment during the funeral occurred when Maria's casket was being lowered into the ground beside Alejandro's original grave. A warm wind arose, carrying the scent of orange blossoms and the sound of distant music. Many mourners reported seeing 2 figures rising together from the cemetery, holding hands as they ascended into the light. The church bells threw out San Miguel began ringing spontaneously, creating a symphony that seemed to celebrate reunion rather than mourn separation. After Maria's death, her home was converted into a museum and spiritual center dedicated to preserving her story and continuing her work with grieving families. The center became a place where people could learn about maintaining connections with deceased loved ones and find comfort in the knowledge that love truly does transcend physical existence. The legacy of Maria's supernatural marriage lived on, through her children, her writings, and the countless people whose lives had been touched by her story. Her example had fundamentally changed how many people viewed death and the afterlife, offering hope that the bonds forged by true love could never be broken by something as temporary as physical separation. Years after both Maria and Alejandro had moved on to whatever realm awaited them, visitors to San Miguel still reported supernatural experiences in the cemetery where their love story had unfolded. Couples seeking to strengthen their relationships would visit the site where the ghost wedding had taken place, and many claimed to receive blessings from the spirits of Maria and Alejandro, whose love had become a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever wondered whether love could truly last forever. The inscription on Maria's gravestone, placed beside Alejandro's original marker, read simply, "Together at last, forever and always." But those who knew their story understood that Maria and Alejandro had never truly been apart, and that their extraordinary love had proven that some connections are too strong for even death to sever. Their tale remained an enduring testament to the power of love to transcend every boundary, inspire every heart, and prove that the greatest miracles are born from the deepest devotion.